My name is Erica, a 36-year-old pediatric nurse from Seattle. For 15 years, I believed I had the perfect marriage with James until everything shattered in an instant. You never truly know someone even after sharing your life bed and dreams with them. Tonight, as I watch James celebrating with his pregnant mistress at our special restaurant, I approach their table with surprising calm. "Congratulations on your freedom," I say, sliding an envelope across the white tablecloth. Little do they know what truth those papers contain. If you're curious about what happened next, where are you watching from? Drop a like and subscribe if you've ever discovered someone wasn't who they pretended to be. I met James Carson at a hospital charity fundraiser 12 years ago. I was 24, just 3 years into my career as a pediatric nurse passionate about helping children through their toughest moments. He was 28, an ambitious attorney already making a name for himself at a prestigious Seattle law firm. That night, I was volunteering at the registration table, checking in guests and distributing name badges. James arrived alone, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored suit that highlighted his broad shoulders and confident posture. When he smiled and said hello, I fumbled with his name badge. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners, and he helped me pick up the badges I had scattered across the table. "I tend to have that effect on people," he joked, and normally I would have found that arrogant, but something about his playful tone made me laugh. "Well, at least you're self-aware," I responded, finally handing him the correct badge. By the end of the evening, James had found me again. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about his passion for environmental law and how he wanted to make a difference, not just a paycheck. I shared my stories from the pediatric ward, the heartbreaks and the victories. When he asked for my number, it felt inevitable. Our first date was the following weekend at a small Italian restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. By the third date, I knew I was falling in love. Within a year, he proposed on a sunset sail around the bay, and I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of as a little girl. 200 guests, a beautiful ceremony at the Arboretum, and a reception that lasted until dawn. My father gave a tearful speech about finding a man worthy of his daughter, and James promised to love me forever. We bought our first home together in Queen Anne, an upscale neighborhood with tree-lined streets and stunning views of the city. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman that needed work, but James and I spent weekends painting walls and refinishing floors, planning for the family we would have. One bedroom would be for our future child, another for guests, though we joked it might become a second nursery someday. For the first few years, everything was perfect. James was making partner at his firm, and I was promoted to charge nurse in the pediatric oncology department. We traveled to Europe, spent summers hiking in the Cascades, and hosted dinner parties for our growing circle of friends. From the outside, we were the couple everyone envied. When we decided to start trying for a baby, we thought it would happen quickly. I tracked my cycles, took prenatal vitamins, and read every book on conception. But month after month, my period arrived with devastating regularity. After a year of trying, we saw our first fertility specialist. The diagnosis was unexplained infertility. All the tests came back normal for both of us, which was somehow more frustrating than having a clear problem to address. We tried everything. Fertility drugs that made me emotional and bloated, intrauterine insemination that required uncomfortable procedures and precise timing. Nothing worked. 3 years into our fertility journey, we decided to try IVF. The process was grueling. Daily injections that left my stomach bruised. Hormones that turned me into someone I didn't recognize. The financial strain was enormous, even with James's substantial income and my hospital insurance. Each cycle cost over $20,000 with no guarantee of success. The first 2 attempts failed. The eggs were retrieved fertilized, but the embryos stopped developing before they could be transferred. Each failure felt like a death a child we would never know. The third time we got further. 2 embryos were successfully implanted. 2 weeks later, I took a home test and saw the second line appear. The blood test confirmed it. I was pregnant. When the first ultrasound showed 2 heartbeats, James and I cried in the dim exam room, holding each other as the technician pointed out our twins on the screen. For 16 precious weeks, I was a mother. I talked to my babies, played them music, and watched my body change to accommodate their growth. James would rest his hand on my slightly swollen belly at night and whisper about the future. Then, during a routine checkup, the doctor couldn't find the heartbeats. Both babies had died a rare complication. I had to deliver them knowing they were already gone. The grief was overwhelming. I took leave from work, unable to face the children on my ward when I had lost my own. James threw himself into his cases, working longer hours. I thought it was his way of dealing with the loss. After the miscarriage, we agreed to take a break from trying. The emotional and financial toll had been too great. We needed time to heal, to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. Slowly, we found our way back to each other. Date nights became regular again. We renovated the kitchen, converting the space we once imagined would be filled with high chairs and sippy cups. I returned to work, finding solace in caring for other people's children. A year passed, then another. We discussed adoption but never moved forward with it. Looking back, I can see that was the first sign something was changing. James would deflect the conversation, suggest we wait for a better time. The other changes were subtle at first. James started staying later at the office. He joined a new gym. He became protective of his phone, always keeping it face down or in his pocket. A new cologne appeared in his bathroom cabinet, one I hadn't purchased for him. I ignored these red flags, attributed them to work stress or my own paranoia from years of disappointment. When he missed our anniversary dinner because of a client emergency, I told myself these things happen. When I found a long blonde hair on his suit jacket that definitely wasn't mine, I convinced myself it belonged to his new legal assistant. That was the person I had become. A woman so afraid of losing her perfect life that she would rationalize away the truth staring her in the face. If only I had known then how much strength I actually possessed. The earring was tiny, a simple gold stud with a small diamond that caught the light when I picked it up from the floor of James's car. I had borrowed his SUV to transport donations to the children's hospital and was cleaning out crumbs from the passenger side when I saw it. My earlobes aren't pierced. Never have been. I'm allergic to most metals, something James knew well after an unfortunate incident with a silver necklace he gave me our first Christmas together. For a moment, I sat in the driveway holding that earring between my thumb and forefinger, trying to conjure a reasonable explanation. Perhaps it belonged to a client. Maybe one of his colleagues had borrowed the car. I placed it in the small dish on his dresser without mentioning it, waiting to see if he would notice, if he would panic or explain. He never said a word. The earring disappeared the next day. I might have continued in blissful denial if not for his carelessness 3 weeks later. James had been working from home, claiming a deadline on a big environmental case. He'd been irritable and distracted, snapping at me for asking simple questions about dinner plans. That evening, he announced he needed to return to the office to access some files. After he left, I went to use his laptop to order groceries because mine was charging. The browser was still open to his email account. I am not proud of what I did next, but I cannot regret it either. Something compelled me to click on his sent messages. Perhaps some subconscious part of me already knew what I would find. The emails between James and Amanda filled the screen. Amanda Pearson, his paralegal. The woman he had hired 2 years earlier, who I had met at the firm's Christmas party. tall, blonde, and ambitious, with a laugh that carried across crowded rooms. Their exchanges were intimate and explicit. They spoke of rendezvous at hotels, of feelings that had developed beyond the physical. There were plans for weekends away disguised as business trips to conferences that I now realized had never existed. The most recent emails discussed her pregnancy, 3 months along, the joy they shared, the future they planned. While I had been grieving our lost babies, mourning the family we might never have, James had been creating one with someone else. I printed the emails, then closed the browser and shut down the computer. In our bedroom, I packed an overnight bag and drove to a hotel across the city. Only when I was alone in that anonymous room did I allow myself to break down sobbing until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. That night, I cycled through every emotion imaginable. Betrayal so deep it felt physical, as if something had been cut from me. Rage that made me want to destroy everything we had built together. Humiliation at the thought of everyone knowing that my husband had been unfaithful. Grief for the years I had devoted to a man who could discard me so easily. By morning, something cold and clear had crystallized within me. I would not confront him immediately. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I would gather information, understand the full scope of his betrayal, and then decide how to proceed. I returned home before James would be awake, unpacked my bag, and behaved as if nothing had changed. When he kissed me goodbye, claiming another long day at the office, I smiled and wished him luck with his case. Then I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and contacted a private investigator recommended by a colleague whose sister had gone through a similar situation. Maxwell Cooper was a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. He was professional and compassionate when we met at a coffee shop far from my neighborhood. "I need documentation," I told him, sliding the printed emails across the table. "I need to know where they meet, how long it's been going on, and anything else that might be relevant." "Are you planning to divorce?" he asked. "I'm planning to be prepared," I answered. For the next 2 weeks, Maxwell followed James. The evidence he collected was damning. Photos of James and Amanda entering and leaving her apartment building. A weekend at our vacation cabin on Lake Chelan, a place filled with memories of anniversaries and summer escapes. Dinner at restaurants where James and I had once celebrated birthdays and promotions. The most painful discovery was learning that the affair had not begun 2 years ago, as I had assumed from the emails, but nearly 3 years ago. Before our last IVF attempt. Before the twins. While I was pumping myself full of hormones and praying for a miracle, James was already betraying our vows. During this investigation, I maintained a facade of normalcy that deserved an Academy Award. I prepared James's favorite meals, listened to his stories about work, and even made love to him when he initiated it all, while feeling as if I were watching myself from a distance. The strain began to show despite my best efforts. I lost weight, dropping 10 pounds from my already slim frame. I couldn't sleep, spending nights staring at the ceiling, imagining them together. Anxiety attacks would strike without warning, sending me to the hospital bathroom to breathe through paper towels pressed against my mouth. My colleague Jennifer noticed first. "Erica, something's wrong. You're not yourself." I almost told her everything. The words rose to my lips, desperate for release, but I swallowed them back. Admitting it aloud would make it real in a way I wasn't yet prepared to face. "Just stressed about a difficult patient," I lied. "I'll be fine." The truth was, I didn't know if I would ever be fine again. Each morning I woke up next to a stranger wearing my husband's face, wondering how many more days I would need to maintain this charade. The answer came sooner than expected. I knew something was different the moment James walked through the door that Thursday evening. His movements were too deliberate, his smile too practiced. He carried a grocery bag and announced he was cooking dinner, something he hadn't done in months. "I got the ingredients for that pasta dish you love," he said, avoiding my eyes, as he unpacked prosciutto cream and mushrooms. "And a bottle of that Barolo we had in Tuscany." The wine was a calculated choice. A reminder of happier times, our 10th anniversary trip to Italy. A trip where I now realized he had been texting Amanda while I slept beside him. I sat at the kitchen island watching him chop and saute, making small talk about his day. He was nervous, his movements jerky, dropping the wooden spoon twice. When he finally set the plates on the dining table, complete with candles and the good napkins, a sense of calm settled over me. Whatever was coming, at least the waiting would be over. We ate in silence for several minutes before James cleared his throat. "Erica, we need to talk." I set down my fork and looked at him directly. "Yes, we do." He seemed momentarily thrown by my composure, but pushed ahead with what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "I think we both know things haven't been right between us for some time." He began swirling the wine in his glass. "After everything we went through with the fertility treatments, the miscarriage, it changed us. Changed me." I remained silent, watching him construct his narrative of mutual responsibility. "I feel like we've been going through the motions, living separate lives under the same roof." He took a long drink of wine. "I think we've grown apart." "Is that what you think happened?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyes flickered with uncertainty before hardening with resolve. "Yes, but there's more. I need to be honest with you." Here it comes, I thought. "I've met someone else. It wasn't planned. It just happened." Another classic line from the Cheater's Handbook. "Amanda," I said quietly. His head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. "How did you know?" "Continue with what you were saying, James." He recovered quickly. "Yes, Amanda. My paralegal. It started as friendship, but it became more. I tried to end it several times to recommit to our marriage, but..." He trailed off, his face a mask of contrived regret. "But what?" I prompted. "But the connection was too strong." He reached across the table as if to take my hand, then thought better of it when he saw my expression. "I never meant to hurt you, Erica." The audacity of that statement nearly broke my composure. "There's something else." James straightened in his chair. "Amanda is pregnant." I nodded slowly, as if this were new information. "I see. 3 months along." He continued, clearly discomfited by my calm reaction. "We're having a baby girl." The knife twisted deeper. A daughter. The child we had dreamed of having together. "I want a divorce," he said finally. "I know this is sudden and unfair, but I need to do right by Amanda and the baby." Do right by them. As if he hadn't been doing wrong by me for years. "I understand you're angry," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "You have every right to be. Scream, throw things. Call me every name in the book. I deserve it." He was offering me permission to fall apart, to become the hysterical soon-to-be ex-wife who would make him feel justified in leaving. I refused to give him that satisfaction. "Are you in love with her?" I asked instead. The question seemed to surprise him. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I am." "Then there's nothing to discuss." I stood up, collecting our plates. "I'll contact an attorney tomorrow." "That's it." James looked almost disappointed. "You're not going to fight for our marriage." The dishes clattered in the sink as I turned to face him. "Would you stay if I did?" His silence was answer enough. "I thought so." I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. You've made your decision, James. You don't need my permission or forgiveness. You just need me to get out of your way. I never wanted to hurt you. He repeated the platitude, sounding hollower each time. When will you move out? I asked. He looked startled. I thought we could both stay here until we figure out the details. No. My first firm boundary. I'm not living under the same roof while you prepare for your new family. You need to leave, this weekend. Where am I supposed to go? I'm sure Amanda has room for you, I replied, considering the circumstances. His mouth tightened with irritation. This wasn't going according to his script. Fine. I'll pack some things tomorrow and be out by Saturday. We can work out the details of the house and finances through our lawyers. That sounds reasonable. I agreed, as if we were discussing a business arrangement rather than the dismantling of 15 years together. James stood awkwardly in the kitchen, seemingly at a loss for what to do next. I turned away from him and began washing the dishes, a clear dismissal. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, he said finally. I didn't respond, and after a moment I heard his footsteps heading upstairs. Once I was certain he was gone, I gripped the edge of the sink, letting the hot water run over my shaking hands. I had survived the first confrontation. I had maintained my dignity, but the worst was yet to come. That night, as James slept in the guest room, my phone buzzed with messages from friends who had already heard rumors. Laura asking if I was okay, Michael offering his spare room if I needed to get away, Sarah demanding to know if the gossip about James and that blonde bimbo was true. News traveled fast in our social circle. James had likely been confiding in his friends for months, painting himself as trapped in an unhappy marriage, setting the stage for his exit. I responded to none of the messages. This was my private pain, not yet ready to be shared or dissected by well-meaning friends. Instead, I lay awake planning my next steps. James expected me to crumble to beg or bargain. He expected to walk away with minimal consequences, his new life already waiting. He had no idea what was coming. The offices of Thompson Legal Group occupied the 22nd floor of a downtown high-rise with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. Sandra Thompson had built her reputation representing high-profile clients in contentious divorces, known for her shark-like instincts and uncompromising approach. So, your husband wants to leave you for his pregnant paralegal, she summarized after I had explained my situation. Tale as old as time, but you're handling it with unusual composure, which I appreciate. I'm a pediatric oncology nurse, I replied. I've learned to function through crisis. Sandra nodded approvingly. Good. Emotion has its place, but not in legal strategy. Now, what are your priorities in this divorce? I had thought carefully about this question on the drive over. Financial security primarily. We've built a life together for 15 years. I don't want to be left with nothing while he starts over. What about the house? I don't think I want to keep it. Too many memories. Understandable. She made a note on her legal pad. Any joint business ventures or investments? Several. James handles most of our finances, but I've brought copies of our tax returns and investment statements. Sandra reviewed the documents, her expression sharpening. Your husband makes substantially more than you do. Yes, his base salary is around $300,000 plus bonuses. I make about $90,000 at the hospital. Has he offered any settlement terms yet? Not specifically. He just said we'd work everything out through lawyers. She tapped her pen against her desk. Let's look at your joint accounts. What Sandra discovered confirmed my worst fears. James had been systematically moving money for months, not withdrawing large suspicious amounts, but transferring funds in smaller increments to accounts I hadn't known existed. This is actually good for us, Sandra said. Financial infidelity on top of actual infidelity. Judges don't look kindly on spouses who hide assets. Can we prove it's deliberate? The pattern is clear, and with the timing coinciding with his affair, it's damning. She leaned forward. Mrs. Carson, I recommend we conduct a full forensic accounting of your finances. It's expensive, but worth it. I suspect we'll find more. She was right. The forensic accountant discovered an offshore account in the Cayman Islands with over $400,000 funds that had been siphoned from our joint savings and investments over the past 2 years. He also found evidence that James had used our joint funds to pay for vacations with Amanda Jewelry and even the down payment on a luxury condo that was in the process of being purchased. While this investigation was underway, a memory surfaced that I couldn't shake. At last year's Christmas party for James's firm, I had spent 20 minutes talking with Amanda at the bar while James chatted with the senior partners. She had been friendly, asking about my work at the hospital, sharing stories about her law school experience. "Do you have children?" she had asked, sipping her martini. I had given my practiced response about not yet, but hopefully someday. "I understand completely," she had said. "I have PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. My doctor says I'll have trouble conceiving naturally when the time comes." The conversation had moved on to other topics, and I hadn't thought about it again until now. Amanda had a condition that made pregnancy difficult, yet here she was miraculously expecting. 3 months along, according to James. As a medical professional, I knew that while PCOS made conception challenging, it wasn't impossible. Still, something didn't add up. I decided to approach the question from a different angle. I called my old medical school friend Diane, who now worked as a reproductive endocrinologist at a fertility clinic downtown. "I need to ask you something hypothetically," I began after catching up briefly. "If a woman with PCOS became pregnant after years of difficulty, what would the typical treatment protocol have been?" Diane explained the standard approaches: lifestyle changes, medications like Clomid to induce ovulation, possibly injectable fertility drugs, IUI or IVF if those failed. Would there be medical records of these treatments? Absolutely. Detailed documentation of every medication procedure and outcome. And if this woman had used donor eggs due to poor egg quality, would that be documented as well? Of course. There's extensive paperwork for gamete donation. Legal consent forms, screening results, donor profiles. Why do you ask? I sidestepped the question, just trying to understand a patient's situation better. My next call was to Maxwell Cooper, the private investigator. "I need more information about Amanda Pearson's medical history," I told him. "Specifically, any fertility treatments she might be undergoing." Maxwell was professional but cautious. "Medical records are confidential, Mrs. Carson. I can't access those directly." "I understand, but you can find out which clinics she visits, right? Public information like appointments, scheduling patterns." "That's doable," he agreed. "What are you looking for exactly?" "Inconsistencies," I said simply. Maxwell's investigation revealed that Amanda had indeed been receiving treatment at Seattle Fertility Partners, one of the city's top reproductive medicine centers. Over the past 6 months, she had regular appointments, typically on Tuesday afternoons, when she claimed to be at legal seminars. The most significant discovery came from an unexpected source. Maxwell had spoken with a former receptionist from the clinic who had recently been fired and was feeling vindictive. While she couldn't share specific medical details, she remembered Amanda clearly. The blonde lawyer. "Yeah, she wasn't using her own eggs. I processed the paperwork for the donor egg program. Very hush-hush about it, didn't even want the standard donor acknowledgement forms sent to her home address." This information was a breakthrough, but I needed more concrete evidence. Donor eggs didn't necessarily mean James wasn't the father, though it did mean Amanda had lied about her fertility situation. The final piece came through Sandra Thompson's legal channels. As part of the divorce discovery process, she requested financial records that showed James had been paying substantial sums to Seattle fertility partners as well. These payments align with the typical costs of IVF using donor eggs, Sandra informed me. But there's something else interesting here. The timing. The payments had begun 8 months ago, long before Amanda became pregnant. There were charges for sperm analysis storage fees, and most tellingly, a charge code that the clinic used for donor sperm services. Are you saying they used both donor eggs and donor sperm? I asked, struggling to process this information. It appears so, Sandra confirmed, which means genetically, the baby isn't related to either of them, I finished. The realization hit me with unexpected force. James had left me blamed our fertility struggles only to create a family with Amanda using completely donor gametes. The hypocrisy was staggering. This could significantly impact your divorce settlement, Sandra said. He's been dishonest about multiple aspects of this situation. I need proof, I said. Something irrefutable. That was when I remembered the personal items James had left behind when he moved out. His old toothbrush was still in the medicine cabinet. Hairbrushes with strands of his hair remained in the bathroom drawer. DNA testing had advanced significantly. With a proper sample, a lab could determine if James's DNA was compatible with being the father of the child Amanda was carrying, even without direct access to the fetus. I collected the items and sent them to a private laboratory that specialized in paternity testing, along with the donor sperm information we had obtained through legal discovery. 2 weeks later, I had my answer. The lab confirmed what I had suspected. Based on the genetic markers in the donor sperm that had been used, it was impossible for James to be the biological father of Amanda's baby. I now had the evidence I needed. The question was how and when to use it. The answer presented itself in an unlikely form and invitation. Through mutual friends, I learned that James and Amanda were celebrating their new beginning at Canlis, the upscale restaurant where James had proposed to me 15 years earlier. The symmetry was too perfect to ignore. The scene of his greatest promise to me would become the scene of his greatest humiliation. I asked Sandra if revealing this information would have any negative legal implications for my divorce proceedings. On the contrary, she said, it demonstrates his pattern of deception. Just don't do anything that could be construed as harassment or emotional distress. Be factual, be brief, and be gone. With that advice in mind, I prepared for the confrontation that would change everything. The DNA test results arrived in a plain white envelope, clinical and unassuming, belying the explosive information contained within. I transferred the documents to a more professional-looking portfolio, adding a cover letter summarizing the findings in clear, unmistakable language. On the night of their celebration, I spent extra time on my appearance. Not out of vanity, but strategy. I selected a sleek black dress that accentuated my slimmer figure, a silver statement necklace James had given me for our 10th anniversary, and subtle makeup that highlighted my best features. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Not because of the outfit, but because of the woman wearing it. 3 months ago, I had been devastated believing my world had ended when James announced he was leaving. Now I saw strength in my eyes that I hadn't known I possessed. I called a rideshare service rather than driving myself. I wanted a glass of champagne afterward to toast my liberation. Canlis sat perched on a hillside above Lake Union, its mid-century architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows offering some of the best views in Seattle. As I approached the entrance, Memories flooded back. James on one knee, the ring catching the candlelight, my tears of joy as I said yes. How naive I had been. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Carson, we weren't expecting you tonight." "I'm not staying," I assured him. "I just need to deliver something to my husband." His eyes registered understanding. The staff surely knew James was here with another woman. Seattle was a small city in many ways, especially among the professional class. "They're at the corner table by the west window," he said discreetly. I nodded my thanks and made my way through the dimly lit dining room. The restaurant was busy, conversation and laughter creating a pleasant background hum. I spotted them immediately. James looked relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, leaning across the table to wipe something from Amanda's lip. She was glowing in a red maternity dress that accentuated her small bump, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. An unmistakable diamond sparkled on her left hand, replacing the modest engagement ring she had worn before. They were so absorbed in each other, they didn't notice me until I was standing directly beside their table. "Erica," James nearly knocked over his wine glass. "What are you doing here?" Amanda's smile vanished, her hand instinctively moving to cover her stomach. "Please don't let me interrupt your celebration," I said calmly. "I just wanted to personally congratulate you both on your new life together." James's expression shifted from shock to wariness. "Thank you. That's unexpectedly kind." "Well, we were married for 15 years. I'd like to think we can be civilized." I smiled, pleased to see the confusion on his face. This wasn't the confrontation he had been bracing for. Amanda recovered some of her composure. "That's very mature of you, Erica. I know this can't be easy." The condescension in her voice almost made me laugh. She had no idea what was coming. "Actually, I brought you a little gift." I continued, reaching into my purse for the envelope. "Something I thought you both should have." "That's really not necessary," James began, but I had already placed the envelope on the table between them. "Congratulations on your freedom," I said, echoing the words from the thumbnail text. "And on your new family." James stared at the envelope as if it might contain anthrax. "What is this?" "Just some information I thought you should have." I took a step back from the table. "Particularly concerning your daughter." That caught his attention. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What about our daughter?" The possessive pronoun was the final push I needed. "Open it, James. I think you'll find it enlightening." With visible reluctance, he picked up the envelope and removed the contents. Amanda leaned forward, trying to read over his shoulder. I watched as his expression transformed from suspicion to confusion to dawning horror. "This can't be right," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "What is it?" Amanda demanded, trying to take the papers from him. "It's a DNA analysis," James said, his voice hollow. "Comparing my genetic markers with those of the donor sperm used in your IVF procedure." The color drained from Amanda's face. "How did you—" "That's not important," I interjected. "What matters is what it shows. The child Amanda is carrying isn't biologically related to either of you. Donor eggs, donor sperm." James turned to Amanda, his expression thunderous. "You told me we were using my sperm with donor eggs. You said the baby was mine." Amanda's composure cracked. "I can explain." "Explain what?" James's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "That you lied about the most fundamental aspect of this pregnancy, that I left my wife for a child that isn't even mine." "Keep your voice down," Amanda hissed, looking around frantically. "People are staring." "Let them stare," James snapped. "You've been lying to me for months. making me believe I was finally going to be a father. You are going to be a father, she insisted. Biology doesn't matter. We're a family. A family built on lies, he retorted. Just like you lied about your PCOS making natural conception difficult. That was just a cover story for using donor eggs, wasn't it? I watched their relationship unravel in real time, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and pity. Part of me wanted to stay and witness the full implosion, but I had accomplished what I came for. This was no longer about me. I should leave you two to discuss this privately, I said. James turned to me, his anger momentarily redirected. You knew about this, and waited until now to tell me in public. I only confirmed it recently, I replied evenly. And yes, I chose this moment deliberately. Dramatic, isn't it? Rather like announcing you're leaving your wife of 15 years for your pregnant mistress over a dinner you cooked to soften the blow. His mouth opened, then closed, no rebuttal forthcoming. Erica, he said after a moment, his tone shifting to one I recognized from courtroom footage, the reasonable voice he used when trying to salvage a difficult case. Can we talk privately? There's clearly been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, James. The lab results are quite clear, and no, we can't talk privately. There's nothing left to discuss between us. Amanda was openly crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. James, please. I was afraid to tell you the truth. I thought you might not want the baby if you knew. So you lied. Just like you lied about being on birth control when we started seeing each other. Just like you lied about accidentally getting pregnant. His voice was ice cold. Was anything you told me true? I had heard enough. I wish you both well, I said, meaning it more than I expected to. Truly, whatever happens next is between you two. As I turned to leave, James caught my wrist. Erica, wait. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. I'm sorry, he said, and for the first time in months he seemed sincere. For everything. I made a terrible mistake. Yes, you did, I agreed. Several, in fact. But that's no longer my concern. The weight that had been crushing me for months lifted as I walked away from their table. I nodded to the maitre d' on my way out, stepped into the cool Seattle evening, and took my first deep breath as a truly free woman. As promised, I ordered that glass of champagne at the bar across the street, a silent toast to the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. My phone buzzed continuously with texts from James, increasingly desperate. I silenced it without reading them. Whatever crisis he was navigating with Amanda, it was no longer my problem. For the first time in 15 years, I was answerable only to myself. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and somehow emerged stronger. The future stretched before me uncertain but full of possibilities I had not dared to imagine. The divorce was finalized 4 months later with terms far more favorable than I had initially hoped for. James, perhaps motivated by guilt or fear of public humiliation, if the full story emerged, agreed to a generous settlement without the protracted legal battle Sandra had prepared for. I received half of all our assets, including those he had attempted to hide substantial alimony for 5 years, and a clean break from the entanglement of our shared life. The house was sold, the proceeds split equally after the mortgage was paid off. James and Amanda's relationship did not survive the revelation at the restaurant. According to mutual friends who couldn't resist sharing the gossip, they had attempted counseling but ultimately separated 3 weeks after the confrontation. Amanda kept the baby, a decision James supported financially, but not emotionally, having removed himself entirely from the pregnancy and birth. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering. The desire for revenge had burned out of me the moment I walked away from that restaurant table. What remained was compassion for the child who would be born into such complicated circumstances, and a hope that both James and Amanda would find their way to better versions of themselves. My own journey toward healing was neither straightforward nor quick. There were still nights I woke up reaching for someone who was no longer there. Days when the magnitude of betrayal hit me anew, sending me spiraling into anger or grief. Moments when I questioned every decision I had made throughout our marriage, wondering if I could have prevented its collapse. Therapy became my lifeline. Dr. Leanne Wilson, a specialist in trauma and betrayal, helped me navigate the complex emotions of my new reality. "You're experiencing what we call post-betrayal syndrome," she explained during our first session. "It's similar to PTSD in many ways. The person you trusted most violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible." Through weekly sessions, I learned to separate James's choices from my worth, to recognize that his infidelity reflected his character flaws, not my inadequacies as a wife. To acknowledge that while I couldn't have prevented his betrayal, I had enabled it by ignoring red flags and accepting his distancing as normal. I took a 3-month leave of absence from the hospital, using part of my settlement to volunteer with a medical mission in Guatemala. Working with children who had so little yet gave so much joy helped put my own troubles in perspective. Their resilience inspired my own. In a small village outside Antigua, I met other volunteers from around the world, forming friendships based on shared purpose rather than shared history. For the first time in years, no one knew me as James's wife, or the woman whose husband left her. I was simply Erica, the nurse from Seattle, with skilled hands and a kind heart. Upon returning home, I decided not to move back to our old neighborhood. Instead, I purchased a small craftsman house in Ballard, a vibrant community north of downtown. The house needed work, which became a form of therapy. I painted walls, refinished floors, planted a garden. Each improvement represented another step in reclaiming my identity. Slowly, I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, having frayed too much during James's campaign to portray our marriage as unsalvageable. Others strengthened particularly with those who had experienced similar betrayals and understood the long path to recovery. Michael Thompson, an old friend from nursing school, who had reached out immediately after hearing about James's departure, became a particularly important presence in my new life. Unlike others who walked on eggshells around me, Michael treated me normally, inviting me to concerts and hiking trips, texting random jokes in the middle of workdays. Our friendship evolved gradually into something deeper, though neither of us rushed to define it. Both carrying scars from past relationships, we moved cautiously, prioritizing honesty and communication above all else. 6 months after the divorce, I made a decision that surprised even me. I began the process to become a single parent through adoption. The desire for a family hadn't disappeared with my marriage, and at 37, I didn't want to wait for another relationship to potentially develop into parenthood. The home study paperwork and waiting list were daunting, but nothing compared to what I had already survived. Sandra helped navigate the legal aspects, and my parents offered both emotional and financial support, thrilled at the prospect of finally becoming grandparents. 14 months after submitting my application, I received the call that would change everything again. A baby girl had been born 2 days earlier to a teenage mother who had selected my profile from the adoption agency's files. The birth mother wanted to meet me before making her final decision. Lucy Martinez was 18, brilliant and determined to attend college in the fall. She had hidden her pregnancy from everyone except her grandmother until the 7th month, making adoption the only feasible option if she wanted to pursue her education. "I want her to have 2 parents," Lucy admitted during our meeting, cradling her newborn daughter. "But when I read your profile, saw how much you've overcome, how determined you are to be a mother despite everything, I knew you would love her enough for 2 parents." 3 days later, I brought Sophia Maria Carson home. Named for Lucy's grandmother and my own mother, she became the center of my reconstructed world. Motherhood as a single parent was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated despite my professional experience with children. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the logistical gymnastics of balancing work and childcare tested my limits daily. Yet the joy Sophia brought outweighed every difficulty. Her first smile, first word, first steps became milestones, not just in her development, but in my healing. Through her, I rediscovered wonder, patience, and unconditional love. James reached out one final time a year after our divorce. He had moved to Portland, started a new job with a smaller firm focusing on environmental law, and according to mutual friends, entered therapy to address his pattern of dishonesty and avoidance. His email was simple. "I'd like to meet if you're willing. There are things I need to say to you in person." After careful consideration and discussion with Dr. Wilson, I agreed. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown Sophia with a babysitter. The man across from me looked both familiar and strange. Thinner with new lines around his eyes, less polished than the James I had known. "Thank you for seeing me," he began. "I know you have no reason to do me any favors." "I'm not here for you," I replied honestly. "I'm here for me, for closure." He nodded, accepting this. "I've spent a lot of time in therapy this past year trying to understand why I did what I did. Not just the affair, but the lying, the financial deception, all of it." "And have you found answers?" "Some. Not enough to justify any of it, but enough to recognize patterns I need to break." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I betrayed you in the worst possible way, Erica. You were nothing but supportive and loving throughout our marriage, even when I was emotionally absent. I blamed our fertility issues for my unhappiness, but the truth is I was afraid of vulnerability, of the deep connection you offered." His honesty surprised me, but I remained guarded. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you deserve to hear it. Because I need to say it aloud to someone who knows the full extent of what I did." He looked down at his coffee cup. "And because I want you to know that while I can never make amends for the pain I caused, I am trying to become someone who wouldn't hurt another person that way." We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering ground that should have been traversed years earlier in our marriage. I shared my own perspective on where we had failed as partners, not to absolve him of responsibility, but to understand the dynamic that had allowed his deception to flourish. As we prepared to leave, James asked about Sophia. I showed him a recent picture on my phone. "She's beautiful," he said sincerely. "You were always meant to be a mother, Erica. I'm glad you found your way there, even if it wasn't the path we once imagined together." We parted with no promises of friendship, but with something I hadn't expected to find: peace. The conversation hadn't erased the past, but it had helped me place it in a context I could live with. Walking home that afternoon, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The loss that had felt unbearable had created space for unexpected gifts. I had learned that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to move forward despite it. That forgiveness isn't forgetting, but releasing the power of past wounds to determine future choices. That sometimes the things we cling to most desperately are the very things we need to release in order to grow. Today, 3 years after that life-changing night at the restaurant, I look at my reflection and barely recognize the woman who once believed her worth was tied to a man's fidelity. Sophia toddles around our home, chattering in her developing language, secure in the knowledge that she is fiercely loved. Michael visits often, his relationship with both of us deepening at its own natural pace. The future I once feared has become a present I cherish. Not perfect, certainly not what I had planned, but authentically mine. If you're facing betrayal or loss that feels insurmountable, remember this: the story isn't over. The most painful chapters may be the ones that lead to the most profound growth. Trust not in others' constancy, but in your own resilience. The truth, however difficult, always sets you free. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that eventually led to something better in your life? Share your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of survival and transformation. And remember, sometimes the things we think will break us become the foundation on which we build our strongest selves. Thank you for listening.